Good afternoon, and thank you to everyone on the line for taking time to participate in this webinar. It is the 6th presentation in our 2016 Educational Web Series on BMC Control-M, and it is the 3rd of our introductory track. For those of you who are new to our BMC Control-M webinar series, we are featuring 2 tracks, Introductory and Expert, so participants can follow along with the topic track that best suits their level of expertise. Thanks again for those of you who have been joining us for each of these webinars. As always, we appreciate your participation. Now for the usual housekeeping items, all lines are muted. We will have some time at the end for Q&A using the question or chat features that you see available to you on your webinar control panels. Should you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to do so using these same features, and we will do our best to respond as they come in. We are recording this presentation so that it can be available for future viewing. Note that each of our webinar recordings is mailed to call participants a day or so following the presentation, and they are also posted on our website where we list all of our webinars, past and future, under events. Taking a look at the agenda on your screen, today we will be covering our introductions about Cetan Corp and also the members of our team you will be hearing from today. We will move into a recap of some standard workload automation challenges. For those of you who have been viewing these presentations, these will be familiar to you. And for those of you who are new, they may also be familiar to you as you may experience them in your office on a daily basis. Then we are going to move into the topic, which is converting to BMC Control-M. And we don't just want you to convert, we want to tell you how to convert with confidence. We'll also talk about how long it will take, so setting some expectations there. And then we'll also cover that the second topic is migrating. So we'll cover some migration tools and introduce a methodology for you. Then, as I mentioned, we will have time at the end for some Q&A. Our presenter today is Tony Morelli, our VP of Solutions Delivery here at Cetan Corp. Tony joined the team in 2011 and contributes nearly 3 decades of IT industry experience to the team. In his career, he has held various technical and leadership roles, and he has worked for companies such as BMC Software. And at BMC, he established the Commercial Services Division of the Workload Automation Professional Services Business Unit. Again, my name is Kristen Malcolm, and I'm the Director of Marketing here at Cetan Corp. My background includes leading marketing strategy, planning, and execution for growing and innovative technology brands. I've been a member of the Cetan Corp team for just shy of 2 years, during which time it's been a pleasure working with and getting to know our customers and bringing you fresh content and programs around BMC Control-M. Taking a look at the slide you see now, Cetan Corp was founded in 2007 and is a Native American veteran-owned business headquartered in Chesapeake, Virginia, which is in southeastern Virginia. We also have a federal office located in Northern Virginia. In addition to these office locations, we have team members located throughout North America, and you will often find them with our clients in their offices. Cetan Corp is a BMC Elite Solution Partner and leading workload automation partner. And now, moving on, as I mentioned at the opening, we have been engaged in this educational webinar series for almost a year now. And different this year, we are offering 2 separate tracks. And we have a screen coming up. There it is. The introductory track, for those of you who might want to know more about just general workload automation trends and fundamental details around Control-M and what makes it the leading solution. So when you look at the track, you can see a logical progression there based on the level of familiarity with the solution. Starting with our presentation just a few weeks ago that provided a basic introduction of why do you need the solution, and then moving forward to a discussion around implementing the tool and then utilizing some of its features. And then we have our expert track. And this track is more geared towards organizations that are already familiar with or using Control-M and want to explore more of the advanced features that the solution offers, or simply looking for a refresher on a particular topic. Please feel free to check out our full list of upcoming webinars that can be found on our website. That's at cetancorp.com events, as we are always looking for new topics and additional content that we can add to our content schedule. If you have a certain topic of interest to you that you would like to see represented, please feel free to reach out to us with that topic, and we may be able to add it to the rotation. And Let's see, up on our screen now, I want to mention one additional resource that we have this year, and this is our BMC Control M public training. Our public training is hosted in our headquarters for companies with maybe one or two individuals in need of training and would like to study among peers away from some of the typical distractions that you may encounter in the office. This is an alternative to our active on-site training program that we offer for training entire teams. Our training does follow a role-based curriculum with our first course, Workload Automation Solution Essentials, Basic Scheduling and Operations, beginning in July, so next month. Then we move on to our advanced and also solution administration courses. Then they repeat again throughout the year. This training is delivered by our senior consultants who do this type of training every day of the year, and they provide a very hands-on, real-world experience for students. If you have any interest in our public training, again, please visit our website at cetancorp.com events. Now, up on the screen now, you will see an event that we are actually participating in next week, and this is in Milwaukee. So if anyone is in that area or planning to be in that area, we certainly invite you to join us. We will be watching the Brewers play at Miller Park, and we will be presenting some topics there on control and optimization, new product capabilities, and also be covering some customer use cases. And as always, you know, with these events, it's an opportunity to meet with others and also, you know, meet some of the folks of our team and also BMC's team. So again, with everything else that is available, more information on our events page. And with that, I will turn it over to Tony, who's going to move into today's topic.
All right. Thank you very much, Kristen, and thanks everybody for joining. We've got a lot of stuff to roll through today, so I do want to start kind of where we've been starting with the introductory series for those of you who haven't been on our earlier sessions, and just touch briefly on workload automation challenges. You know, when we're talking about converting to Control M, I always like to start with, you know, why would you want to do that in the first place? And some of the webinars that Kristen mentioned earlier that we've recorded, I think do a real good job of taking us into batch workload challenges and how and why Control M is a good solution for that. But just touching on those at a very high level, you know, it's always good to step back through. And when we look at some of the things that most of our clients are dealing with, you know, increasing workload volumes, and that is, you know, either because they're growing, which is great, or maybe they're merging, or they're part of an acquisition, and they're adding new business units, but you know, always that constant pressure and need to do more. Dealing with the ever-changing technical landscape, you know, multiple platforms, new applications. Sometimes it's, hey, we're just you know, switching out from physical environments to virtual, but oh, by the way, while we're doing that, we're going to be rehosting some applications along the way, and now we've got to manage those things differently. And along the way, we've got some new technologies that we're dealing with. You know, big data was a webinar we did just last week, and that's one that is driving a lot of disruption in the marketplace. Disruption isn't always a bad thing, but certainly one of those areas where Control M can help quite a bit with Control M for big data. Other trends, cloud computing, you know, web enablement, and those types of things are also fairly common. You know, some of the other things that we see, especially in healthcare, insurance, banking, around security and auditing, are big drivers for the need to maybe look at different tools. We've had clients in the past that, you know, had you know, second, third generation workload automation tools, and you know, they were driven to make changes because their auditors needed something that was more transparent, or because they had business continuity issues. So, you know, variety of reasons why you'd want to change, but ultimately, one of the other bigger drivers is, and as you can see all our folks up there with the wrenches and screwdrivers and tools, could very well be that there are already multiple workload automation tools in your environment, and you're trying to consolidate. And you know, consolidation is a great opportunity not only to save money and modernize, but more importantly, introduce consistency with the way that you deliver your batch services. So if anyone has an interest in understanding, you know, hey, we've got these 3 tools, plus we're using cron, plus we've got some phantom servers out there. If anybody's interested in trying to get their arms around where that potential savings might be, or where those efficiency gains might be, certainly follow up with us after the session today. We'd be happy to learn a little bit more about your environment and give you our thoughts on that. One of the things that we also look at, though, is organizations that do have to deal with all those challenges look at the reality of what the implications are if they're not able to effectively support the business or confront those challenges. And the reality, and we see this time and time again, is very simple, and that is that your organization, either your company or even your department within your company, lags behind your competitors. And certainly don't think that you don't have competition, interdepartmental competition within your organization. A lot of times it's the more efficient and effectively run teams that can swallow up the smaller teams from a management and a staff perspective. But whether it's inside of your company or outside or even within certain areas of geography, being behind your competitors certainly compels you to change. And if you think about your IT spend, it's typically one of the biggest line items on your budget. And if you think about what an ineffective IT environment would be, or an ineffective workload automation solution does to your organization, basically serves as a point of constraint. It holds you back. So think about what IT should be, which is really an enabler to your strategic business growth. That's where Control-M comes into play. And again, we've got some earlier webinars we recorded that drill into Control-M capabilities and competitive differentiators. But on the slide that we have up now, I just wanted to step back through what those key capabilities are. And again, as a driver to help you understand why you might be looking to migrate to Control-M, as well as what might help you decide if you've got multiple tools already under your roof, and Control-M might be one of them, how to help make the decision to move in the direction that would best serve your organization. So all of the things that we're going to talk about today are really focused on that last bullet, and that really is the automated conversion tools and the methodologies that go around them. But again, if you're looking at, why would I want to change, everything in front of that bullet are the drivers. A solution that has a very broad, very deep coverage of your computing platforms and business applications, and the ability to attach Control-M to things that might not be standard solution offered by BMC. The ability to create your own custom integration. An ease of use, both at an operational level, at administrative level, and even from the conversion perspective, which we'll be touching on here in just a few slides. Being able to manage everything based on your business services and the batch environment, and being able to do that in a proactive, business-oriented fashion, and then also having a solution that takes into account that the way that we used to do things, which were more operation-centric, have shifted. Operations still very important, but with the new DevOps paradigm and the fact that a lot of entities want to manage and monitor their own workloads, having a solution that's both accessible and empowers the end user in a transparent way is extremely important. And there are a lot of things in Control-M, such as self-service, the application integrator, and the workload change manager that make that possible. And each one of those, by the way, is a topic of a future webinar as well. So if you'd like more information or more details, we have those coming up, as well as the recorded versions from last year as well. But with that, let me move on. And I always talk about conversion in the context that it's a transformational activity, but it's also not a one-time business event. And a lot of times people think, oh, we're going to flip a few switches, turn a few knobs, and hey, we're going to be done. Reality is that it really is more of a continuum. And by that I mean, if you think about most organizations, they've transitioned from more than one solution and more than one tool. I've been involved with Control-M since 1992. I was actually introduced to the product as a result of a large conversion, and we've worked with customers for the last 20 plus years. Many of them have converted from multiple solutions. So think about it in that context. And that is that the conversion is to me as an important of a part of the solution as are the core capabilities. And from the very beginning, Control-M customers have had access to automated conversion tools. Those tools started out just like Control-M did as mainframe solutions, and over the last few decades they've evolved and they've been refined to now things that are specific to the platform where the workload will run on. In fact, we're going to go through and do a demonstration of the control M conversion tool here before the end of our session today. But those tools have been out there. You know, the one thing I always say is that they are not the be-all and end-all of the experience. They are simply tools to help accelerate the process and reduce the manual effort, but they're part of a much larger solution. So let's keep that in mind as we go forward with the topic today. One other thing is that Control M is architected in a way, and the methodologies have been tuned in a way that allow us to migrate you in a way that's business sensitive. You know, it's not a big bang. It's not somebody waving a wand and trying to ramrod something through over the course of a weekend. You know, our experience has always shown that those are the most risky and the most disruptive, and certainly things to be avoided. So we have the ability, you know, actually the benefit of being able to move organizations forward in a nice gradual incremental fashion and do it based on business impact and the organization's tolerance to change, and we'll step through that in just a little bit as well. Methodology that I touched on, and we'll certainly spend a little more time on that as well, is something that has been refined and proven in all types of organizations. We've converted environments that were a couple of hundred jobs, you know, on 2 or 3 servers, as well as clients that had, you know, 25 mainframe LPARs and 1,000 servers and upwards of 1 million different jobs out there. The methodology, just like Control M, is scalable and adaptable, and it's something that, you know, we can update as needed based on the specific scope of any particular project, and we've got some discovery tools that help us do that. Conversion tools being extremely mature, you know, being out there since the early 1990s. You know, the tools themselves are older than some competing job scheduling and workload automation products, but at the same time, BMC continues to invest in those solutions, and the new generation of tools not only do all of the scheduler conversions, but also extend to other areas where you might need to convert workloads, from ERPs like SAP, from big data schedulers like Uzi, and upcoming very shortly will be the ability to convert from managed file transfer solutions once BMC rolls out the new managed file transfer tool that'll be out here towards the end of the summer. That constant investment and refinement of capabilities extends obviously beyond the product to the tools and processes as well. And then the final bullet, and the one thing that we're most interested in, is the fact that we take a hard focus on making sure that our customers are empowered and that they are involved and active participants in the conversion project itself. You know, there's always that discussion of, hey, can you do a turnkey conversion? And we absolutely can, and sometimes there's a business need to do that, but the most successful conversions are ones where it's a partnership. That way we're making sure that, you know, we're gathering all the information we need to about you, and at the same time, your team members are learning as much about the product, the process, and understanding why certain decisions were taken along the way, so that when it's time for us to fold up our tent and go home, the organization is enabled and confident to support the environment after we go. So speaking of confidence, you know, the one thing that we always see is that once somebody buys Control M or they get their hands on the conversion tool, there's that immediate rush of adrenaline and that immediate desire to get started. And our first job as a trusted advisor is to kind of hold you back and put the brakes on and talk about the less sexy part of the conversion, and that is the actual methodology. And we'll get to the tool soon enough, but I want to start with the methodology. Cetan Corp has developed its own methodology, a SureFlight Services Implementation methodology based on a systems development lifecycle. Whether you want to work with us and use ours, or you want to go out and you know, do something different, the one thing we highly recommend is having a formal process that allows you to invest the proper amount of time in planning, allows you to invest the appropriate amount of time in designing the solution, so that when it is time to actually put your hands on the keyboards and start the work doing the installs and the actual conversions and those activities, that you're actually ready to do it. You know, one of the biggest failings I've seen organizations run into, and some of these are very large, very mature organizations, is they actually get down to a certain point, realize they didn't fully understand what it is they needed to do, or the business pushes back, doesn't feel like they fully captured everything they needed to, and as a result, they either have to put the brakes on the project or in worst case, they have to go back and start over. Let's go kind of back to the drawing board. So our methodology helps to make sure that in the plan and design phase that we're not just looking at the technical bits and bytes, but we're also factoring in the business requirements, understanding what the communication plan needs to be, just making sure that there's that right level of socialization throughout the entire activity so that when it's time to actually do the work, everybody that needs to be involved and all the appropriate stakeholders have had their voice heard, and that we've planned out a technical solution, we've planned out a tactical project approach, and we've made sure that the people that needed to be trained and brought up to speed are all ready to go. And then at that point, we can move into the subsequent activities, the installation and configuration and the actual deployment of the workloads. And we'll drill into each one of these with a little more detail as we go forward. One thing I will say is anybody that's interested after this call, if you'd like more details, we'd be happy to share some of the resources that we're going to go through on this presentation. We're happy to share some of those resources with you as well. One of the things we also see is once you've made that decision to move forward with Control-M, and again, that activity is usually going to be maybe followed by or preceded by a proof of concept or some other evaluation. Somewhere along the way, the question starts to emerge of, what's this really going to take us? Is it a 2-week thing? How many people are going to be involved? Is it automated, and do we just flip a switch and does it happen, kind of in a black box for us? And the one thing I would say is those are all definitely legitimate questions. They're all things that we address through our discovery process. And to that end, we've actually developed some discovery tools to make the collection of that information as easy as possible. There's 2 ways that we like to approach getting information about an organization. The first way is to just do it more in a conversational fashion and using discovery questionnaires such as the one that I have up on the screen now. And I'm actually going to jump into it just to show you what our discovery tool looks like. Doing that more in a conversational fashion to understand a little bit about the tools, the environment, how you use them, and if you've got any customization or any special considerations, then getting our actual hands on your data and running it through the conversion tool. That way we've got a view into the data and how that will convert to see what's going to come through cleanly and what might require some level of intervention. And we also have a little more detail around the whys and hows of what you're using today and how long it's been in there. So you can see in our discovery tool, we've got just about every workload automation / scheduling tool that's out there, including generic ones, represented. And if somebody needed to go in, for instance, to, let's say, convert from, let's say, ASG Zeek, just a matter of going directly to that tab in our workbook. And you can see there aren't hundreds of questions in the process, but the questions we do ask are ones that are definitely germane to us understanding what that level of effort would look like. We even prompt people. So if there's a question that's required, then we highlight it in red. Once they respond, the cell goes green, so that way there's a visual indication. And the other thing that we do is where we are asking for certain details, for instance, tell us how many defined jobs and events you have, we also explain where you get that from. So if somebody's not sure, it's very easy to go in and understand exactly where you pull that information from and how you get that out of the product. So once we get the questionnaire, it gives us a baseline to be able to go out and start to build out that preliminary estimate. The other thing that it helps us do then is as we go through and analyze your actual data, gives us the ability to then run through and convert that data in a offline fashion to be able to do that analysis. So these are tools we've got, again, a lot of experience with these. We have an estimating tool that kind of sits behind the discovery questionnaire. So once we have that information, we can plug that into our estimating tool and relatively quickly get back to you with the information you need. One of my pet peeves is the fact that sometimes people need to get that information back quickly, and it takes weeks or months for someone to tell you, hey, this is what we think it's going to take, and this is what we think it's going to cost. We usually like to turn that information around to you within just a matter of a few days so that you can take that, factor that into your decision-making process and move your activity forward. But once we know the information, then it's a matter of putting that information together on a timeline and then also breaking it out kind of at a macro level, in an estimate level. And you can see on the slide that we have now, the spreadsheet actually is kind of aligned along our methodology, so that way you know for each stage, for each phase, how many days we think the activity is actually going to take. And there is no standard answer. It's truly dependent on your environment. It's truly dependent on the number of things you have defined, the number of platforms you're running workload on, how many people you have that need to be trained. It also comes into the realm of your application developers. How do they, for instance, need to test the output of something like this? We've worked with companies where everything was executed through the operations team, and the end users and the application teams weren't really involved at all. We worked with others where the application developers owned the batch workload and they wanted to test everything. So even though the technical part of the conversion didn't take any longer than the first scenario, the extended testing cycles meant that the overall end-to-end time of the project was elongated. And that's not a bad thing either. It's just a matter of calibrating things based on what each individual organization needs. Usually though, once we get to that point where there's an understanding of timeline and process and the amount of effort, then the organization starts getting excited about ripping out the old tool. And unfortunately for us, it's also still a matter of putting the brakes on the process to make sure that we can be a little more methodical in the requirements gathering. So in that regard, we are militant on our side, and it certainly pays dividends on the planning stage, keeping in mind that the time that's invested here is going to pay big dividends on the back end. So the planning and design stage for us helps us mitigate any potential risk that would come out of the conversion, making sure that the ultimate Control M environment is fully aligned to the requirements of the business, and then making sure that the plan's timelines and all the aspects of the plan are based on what your organization needs to see. And again, that kind of goes back to end user testing cycles, who's responsible for sign off, and things along those lines. And to that end, I just wanted to step through one graphic. It I think kind of helps explain the difference between where we see a lot of the potential risk versus where a lot of organizations might think it is. And if you think about most organizations, the first thought is, hey, we're going to give you some of our sample data. We want to see you run it through a conversion tool, and if it converts and it looks cool, then we know that everything's going to be wonderful. Our experience has shown that is, while it's very important, is certainly not the most important factor in the success of the conversion. It's really the stuff that's not in your existing tool or your existing environment. It's in the stuff that sits in the heads of the people in your organization. The institutional knowledge of the people that have been running those environments for the last decade or 2 decades, or God knows, we've had a couple organizations where they've had people that have been involved for over 30 years in the batch environment. So part of our discovery process is to make sure that we capture that information. And again, there's discovery questionnaires and interviews and being more or less aligned with those teams to understand what they know so it can be factored into the plan. Once we get past that institutional knowledge, then we can start looking at all the ways that your organization interacts in the batch world. All the monitoring processes, the problem resolution and notification, change management processes, kind of the day in the life. What do you do when you have to make a change? What do you do when something breaks? And then what are the things that are out there that are required of you to input into the daily workload? Somebody at 5 o'clock going out and checking a file and then rekeying some data into some other file and then letting a job go. Again, unless that's documented somewhere, your database of your existing scheduling tool is not going to have that in there. And then the automated processes are relatively easy to see at that point, whether they're dependencies in and among your existing tools, hooks into third-party automation products, console automation, system or platform automation, or things where you might have written some custom application integration that need to be brought over into the new Control M environment. So if you think about it, those are all things that sit outside of your existing scheduling tool. So when somebody says, hey, convert our database, and if it looks cool, we know that everything's going to be wonderful, we certainly are happy to run through that exercise, but we also need to make sure that we also factor in all of those other things that are kind of broken out in the bullets on the right side of the screen. And those are all things that, in our experience, can have a more significant bearing on the successful outcome of the project. And to that end, there's a whole other series of tools that we have. For instance, our application discovery questionnaire, where we reach out and touch every application owner for every batch application in the organization so that we can start to understand the things that are unique to that particular business application, try to understand if there's any customization. There might be some things that your finance team does that's entirely different from your data warehouse team that we need to include in the project plan. And then also, too, we know that at the application level, there may very well be specific blackout dates or resource constraints that need to be included in the timeline and plan as well as things that might be on the horizon. Maybe a big data activity or some other upgrade to a database or server farm that needs to be factored in. So those are also all things that we grab and factor in. In and around that, we're also developing the technical solution design. And this really is the infrastructure design for Control-M, sizing, performance, the high availability components, and all the things that are needed to be able to lay down what I call a production-ready infrastructure. And by that point in the project now, we've got everything out there. We've got something that management can review and stakeholders can sign off. And then we're able to start getting into the actual meat of the project, laying down the Control-M environment, testing it, and getting into the actual conversion itself. This point, usually the folks are chomping at the bit and they're ready to go. And this is really the point where it is time to start letting the rubber meet the road and getting the Control-M environment stood up, as well as moving forward on some of the initial conversions. And in that regard, let's talk about the conversion a little bit. I mentioned earlier that the conversion tools and processes have been available since the early 1990s, yet they continue to evolve and refine. The list that I have on the screen is the most comprehensive list of conversion capabilities that any vendor on the market has. And if you think about, again, the fact that you could have the best tool in the world, but if it's a death march or a train wreck to get into, a lot of organizations are going to shy away from it. So we've always viewed the conversion process, the tools, the methodology as a key piece of the overall solution. And when and where we run into new scenarios or new tools, we make sure that those are added. Cetan Corp partners with BMC continually to add new capabilities and to refine those tools as well. So you can see the list. Just about every competing vendor is there, as well as things like the SAP environment, be able to convert scheduled workloads out of SAP, out of the big data open source scheduler, Uzi as well, and that list continues to evolve and continues to grow. And this is for the conversion tools, both that sit on the mainframe and on the Windows side. And what I want to do right now is just jump into the conversion tool for the Windows environment. So this conversion tool is one that has been out there for a few years now, and it's really a single source, kind of a single location to be able to drive a majority of the conversions. Again, the mainframe tools, whether it's a TWS or Zeek or any of the mainframe CA tools, those are standalone, but they're productized and fully supported by BMC. The other environments are supported through this tool. And you can see that when it starts up, we get a nice updated list of all the new features and functions that have been added into the tool. And you can see there's quite a bit of title activity out there, mainly because there's a lot of folks that are moving off of that particular solution. Let me expand my screen just to get a little better sense of the tool here. And again, for the sake of time, we certainly can't go through and make this a training class on the conversion, but I did want to take us through an actual conversion and walk through at least the mechanics of the process. The conversion tool itself gives us the ability to create new conversion projects from any one of those technologies that I had on the prior screen, or if we're trying to do things just for learning or demo purposes, there's also demo projects. And again, each one of these includes sample data from from a clean source, if you will, just to be able to go through and see how the tool should work. And that way, if you're trying to convert your data and you're not getting the results you think, or if we're doing it for you and we want to be able to compare it to kind of a known set of metrics, we can use the sample data. But just for the sake of time, I've actually gone through and uploaded a title environment. And when we go through the conversion for this, the conversion tool actually goes through a couple of stages. The first one is what we just ran through, and that is an analysis of the data. So this is the point where the conversion tool pulls in the data that we've given it, regardless of whether it was title or AutoSys or what have you, or cron or Windows Task Scheduler, and it first validates that the data is usable. It's not corrupt or it wasn't produced in a format that it can't use. If so, then obviously the process stops very quickly and it chokes. But if the data is usable, then it gives us a quick summary, and it tells us, hey, out of the data you gave me, I see 17,000 jobs, I see 300 calendars, I see 18 different individual agents out there that are running workload, and it also gives me a list of some of the statistics. You've got a couple of agents that aren't running very many jobs, so forth and so on. So it gives us all of that, and it gives us the ability to expand the details on the individual jobs. So even before I've converted anything, I can go through and I can look at what might be in that definition. So I can see what that, and again, in this case, title, if you're not familiar with title, I apologize, what that definition looks like, so I can kind of prove that the input data looks like it's supposed to. And once I've gone through and done some cursory reviews, I can then move to the next step in the conversion, and that is to actually run the conversion. So once I give it a name and run through a process, it's actually going to churn away and take all that input data and process it. We also have the ability before the conversion to influence how it works, and this gives us the ability to create some unique rules to specify, hey, whenever you see a string that's X, Y, Z, change it to ABC, or if we want to, we can create some different defaults for some of the resulting Control-M fields as well. And once we've done that, then we marry the data with our local parms that we've put in here, and it goes through and does a conversion. There is no rule on how long this part takes. We've done hundreds of thousands, and it takes maybe 30 minutes. We've done 500, and it could take an hour, depending on the complexity. In this case, we've got almost 20,000 jobs coming from the environment. You can see as it's going, we're at least getting a little bit of a progress indicator. If it's moving slow, this is a great time to flip over and catch up on email, or which hopefully none of you are doing right now on me, but good time to catch up on email or other things. But as you can see, progress seems to be going well. And if at some point in time this thing dies, maybe it hits something and it doesn't know what to do and it chokes, there will be an error log, and that error log is something that we can analyze and review. Again, we work with the R&D team at BMC. We can certainly try to figure out if it's one bad definition, if it's some other broader, more global issue that we need to fix. If you're doing the conversion on your own, you can then open a case with BMC and let the customer support team work with you. But if you make it all the way to the end, then as we just did, you also get some very nice statistics. So now we've gone through the evaluation, we've run the conversion, now we actually have the details, and it shows us here from the conversion how many things didn't convert, so error messages, which we have 0. How many things do we have that are warning messages? And you can see there are quite a few specific warnings that we need to react to. Out of the conversion, we have about 15,000 warnings, which isn't out of the ordinary for a first pass on a conversion. What we normally do, and you'll see in our methodology, that we actually go through a couple of passes to refine the results and clean up anything. But you can see, even out of all of this, it only falls into 5 or 6 different categories of warnings, which means that it's easy enough to deal with. Some where we've got command line values that are a little bit long that we need to go back and adjust. Maybe some calendars that need to be reviewed and manually adjusted. Variables, which in title, there's a lot of end-user variables that we need to look at. Sometimes it's one variable that's in 2,000 jobs that we do a mass update and we're able to jump into. So once we understand that, we're able to then start to do some refinement and remediation, and we can drill into each one of those and expand that particular warning message to get the details around that particular issue. And in this case, it'll actually drill in and show us what the variable is and which jobs it pertains to. Again, relatively easy from a diagnostic perspective, and then that way when we go back through, we can start to clean up and refine. You also see a summary at the very bottom that tells us what the resulting Control-M environment looks like. The number of folders that are in Control-M, total number of jobs, and then the converted data, how many things came out without any messages, how many things came out with warnings, or how many entities didn't convert at all. And luckily, as you can see, we had 0 entities that didn't convert, and for the ones with warnings, they just fall into 5 or 6 different categories that we can address. So this is part 2 of that discovery I mentioned. Part 1 is our discovery questionnaires and the more discussion-based data gathering. Step 2 is getting the data, running it through, analyzing it, and being able then to look to see what might shake out that we either need to account for in conversion timelines or factor into our plan if we need to go back and correct or remediate anything, so that way when you get the final product, all of these items are fully addressed. But once we've gone through this, and then we move forward, then we actually have the ability to do some additional validation and even some forecasting if we want to, and load those results into Control-M. So for the sake of time, I'm not going to do any validation through this tool, but what I will do is jump over into a Control-M environment so that you can get a sense for how that workload actually looks inside of the product. And again, with this is from the data that we just converted. For those of you who aren't familiar with Control-M, I highly recommend you jump back to the WebEx that we just did the other week on Control-M capabilities and competitive differentiators, because we drill in and we spend more time in the actual tool itself, kind of going through and doing some navigation. But for those of you who are familiar, then one thing you'll notice is that we've got quite a few jobs. You can see in this case we've got you can see our 17,000 jobs down here, in the job network. And from a raw conversion perspective, Control-M now becomes a very helpful tool for us, because now we can see exactly how things resolved, and we can see exactly how Control-M built them during the conversion. Now, keep in mind that none of this data is running, none of it's live, and at this point in the conversion, it shouldn't be. All we've done is we've built it, we've converted it, we've got our initial results, and we basically have a dashboard from which that we can start to go in and do validation and reviews. And in this case, we can then start the workload based on application to drill into it to understand, if there's something we need to manually adjust or something we need to update through a mass fashion, then this is the opportunity to do that. So if you think about it, how powerful is it to be able to go from taking data from your existing environment or your existing tool, and then in relatively short order, we can have it up and in a visual fashion, showing it to you inside of Control-M, and be in a position there where we can start to work on it and tailor it and start to put it into a parallel test mode. These things still take weeks, if not longer, to get to the point where you want to start flipping switches and turning things on, but at least we're able to expose the results of the conversion to the organization very early on, and let Control-M serve as a tool in the conversion process to make it easier for everyone to get their hands on the resulting job definitions and start to get familiar with them. And just like any other job in Control-M, I can open those things up and I can start to bounce around and look at the data. So you can see this is all the data that translated over from that particular title environment, including the description details. I can open up my windows and get more details on what those things are, but everything translates over, and we also now have the ability, if something didn't translate exactly the way we wanted it to, or if we want to introduce new standards, to use mass update processes to then further tailor and refine that data. So that gives us even more capabilities, so that before we turn on a job and before we actually start to run it, we have the ability to put it through another couple of passes of updates, put it into a parallel test mode, let it parallel test for as long as we want to, and then when it's time to turn it on, we're basically just making one minor update, and then we're decommissioning that workload from the old environment. So it's a nice, gradual, phased approach. And if at any point in time we need to, we can always go back and do further updates or mass changes to the data. In this case, we went through about 17,000 jobs very quickly, and that might create what I would call a false sense of security. So I don't want anyone to think that in 20 minutes we can take a big environment like that and run it through the conversion tool and get you to a position where you're in a position to start activating it. And again, usually this is where we have to be the moderator and hold everyone back and remind everyone that it's not time yet to activate the workload. Again, this is just part of the process of getting it, going through the conversion, going through a couple of iterations, tailoring it, then looking at staging it and activating it based on that predefined plan. We also have to take into consideration training, and you can see that we have a formal training methodology. And again, whether you're working with Cetan Corp or anyone else, I can't emphasize enough training the different stakeholders and doing it based on what their role in the organization is, and also doing it so it lines up with the different stages in the project. Worst thing you see is that day one everybody gets trained, and then 6 months later when you turn on the workload, everybody's forgotten what it was that they learned. So a training plan that's based on the activation schedules of the workload, and also something that takes into account that the process doesn't end the day that you pull the plug on your old tool. There's a post-deployment set of considerations as well, and that is having training programs and training plans in place when you have new team members come on board, as well as when there's new control M releases. We do a tremendous amount of upgrades for our clients, and one thing that we see time and time again is that there are people that might have been given the opportunity to go to training when they first implemented Control M, which was great, but now they're 5 versions down the road and they're 15 years into it, and they've never been exposed to any training on new releases, new features, new functions, and as a result they're not really able to fully exploit the tool. So keep that in mind as well, that training is a very essential part. And then when we get into the next step in the process, which does take us closer to the activation, that's really where we have to start getting into again, back to the bits and bytes on what I'll call the final readiness reviews. And I've kind of broken it out on this slide to show you some of those activities, but keep in mind that this slide is really a kind of a summary of probably a 300 task activation checklist that has all kinds of gates built into it. So if you notice though, part of our readiness review is to make sure that all the stakeholders for the workload that's going to be activated have signed off, that all the change management processes have been addressed, communication is out there, that we've notified our friends at BMC that the workload's going to be turned on so that if there is an issue, they're also apprised of what's going on and able to react and respond accordingly. The other thing that we look at too is just making sure that if we are bringing things over in stages, if some of that workload is dependent on things that are sitting in your old tool, that sometimes we have to build temporary bridges to inform Control M when a dependency has been resolved. So we make sure those temporary bridges are in place as well. Final readiness review also makes sure that, from our perspective, that if we feel that the organization isn't ready, maybe that they haven't invested in training, they haven't spent the time getting the right sign-off from the right stakeholders, this is a time where we will raise our hand as well and notify the management team. Sometimes we've had to do that, and we've taken a pause and gone back and addressed those things that concerned us. In other cases, for a variety of business reasons, there just wasn't the opportunity for our client to extend the window. Maybe they had a license that was going to expire and they just had to get it done. And we move forward together, but everyone with the knowledge that we still need to go back and revisit some of those items of concern. When it's time to do the activation, the other thing that we also do is, even though we're doing things in a gradual staged fashion, we also leverage Control M capabilities such as workload policies and quantitative resources, so that when we do start to turn on that newly converted workload, that we do it very gradually, either through a quantitative resource or a policy, so that we're turning on the things that are again, the lowest impact for that grouping that we're doing, and then slowly start to ramp things up as we're able to validate that things are behaving the way we want them to. It also gives us the ability to immediately shut off a segment of workload if we think that, hey, everything looks cool, but the finance stuff that we just turned on, they're having a problem, so we can turn off just that one leg of the workload and keep everything else going. And then once everything's ready, we get sign off, we throttle everything up, business is updated, then we move into the post-activation. And post-activation really is making sure that there's still a heightened level of monitoring and a heightened level of support for a couple of days for each activation grouping. And that way too, if there is something that pops up, we're there and available to work with the team to rapidly respond and react and make adjustments as we need to. The other thing too is each of those groupings kind of informs the next grouping. So if there was something that procedurally or technically needs to be adjusted, then it gets factored into the next grouping before we turn that on as well. We've worked on conversions where we've done just a handful, 2, 3 groupings. We've done some where we literally did hundreds of applications and they were spread out over, a 6-month period and, 20 different groupings. So again, just as with the timeline, there's no hard and fast answer. The activation cycles and processes is something that, we look at on a case-by-case basis and kind of factor that into your individual plan. But at this point, we go through the activation piece. The only other thing we have to take into account and consideration is making darn sure that the stuff that is in your old environment is turned off. And it's one of those things, and unfortunately we've seen it happen before, where everything went flawlessly, and for whatever reason, the administrator of the old tool forgot to take out some things in system automation, and the next time there was an IPL of the mainframe or a server rebooted, the automation scripts kicked in and restarted the old scheduling tool, and it came up alive and kicking and started running stuff. And sometimes that's happened a month later. So it's part of our checklist, it's part of our process, but it's one of those gotchas that sometimes, it's kind of the monster hiding in the machine people forget about. So those are all things that if you took a look at our larger activation checklist, you'd see, and that's all part of that bigger, broader methodology that I've spoken about. So pieces that we'd love to send out to you. We will record this webinar, but before we kind of move on and wrap up, I just wanted to see if there were any questions about anything we've covered up to this point. And I don't see any. But if we do have, or if you have something that you think about afterwards, feel free to reach out to us. At the same time, if you've got one of those other environments and you'd like to understand more about that environment, reach out to us. We'd be happy to sit down with you and go through the questionnaire and extract your data and kind of walk through to give you our thoughts on what we think it would take time-wise, cost-wise, and also look at if there's any particular areas of risk that you might be focusing on. We can certainly highlight that as well. And with that, I want to go ahead and move on. We can start to wrap up. Before I do, just wanted to remind you that we have quite a few more webinars coming up. Not only the recorded ones that I mentioned that you can step back through if you missed them, but all the ones that we have that are in front of us as well. And as you can see, we kind of move more into our expert series at this point, with Control M reporting, automating file transfers through Control M for automated file transfer, and then some of those more deep and detailed topics as well. So we look forward to seeing you on one of those sessions, and if you'd like to see us out in September, keep in mind that we're going to be at BMC Engage in Las Vegas, and that at that particular event we're also a sponsor again for the 3rd year in a row, so we'd love to see you and love to have you come up and talk to us if you have any questions about anything that we've covered up to this point or anything on a future webinar. We can certainly spend some more time on it when we get together out there. And with that, thank you all very much. Look forward to seeing you on a future webinar. Everybody have a great rest of the week, and we will talk to you later. Thank you.